Hey guys, it's been a while. Welcome back to my channel, True Crime Matters, where we talk about and analyze everything true crime. I'm Tara Marie, and it's so nice to have you back. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you are new here, welcome. I'm so happy to have you. So today I wanted to take time to talk about the Menendez brothers again, since it is once again in the news. This time, it's in the news because Netflix has just released the second installation of Ryan Murphy's series, Monster. Have you guys seen it yet? Have you heard about it? Now, some of you may know the first installment of Monster was called Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story. That installment told the story of serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer and his victims, and it was a huge record-breaking success. This second installment is called Monsters, the Lyle and Erik Menendez story. Now, when the Dahmer installation came out, Ryan Murphy, the creator, and Netflix faced some major backlash from some of Dahmer's victims' families. And one major issue they had was that the series was profiting off their family tragedy, and yet they weren't ever even contacted at all by the creators first, which I can completely understand, or at least have an idea of how, outrageous that must be for the families of the victims. I mean, their loved one suffered a horrible death due to Dahmer, and yet it was that show that pushed Netflix's revenue number over the $300 million mark in Q4 of 2022. In fact, it was the third most watched show in Netflix history. So clearly, for some people, that means Netflix and Murphy are benefiting from their tragedies without caring what those families even had to say. Now, in response to that, Ryan Murphy has stated that him and his team, quote, did their due diligence by reaching out to 20 friends and family members of the victims. However, Ryan claimed his team never heard back from those families. Now, of course, I can't be sure what the truth is there in that circumstance and if those families were really ever contacted. But what I can tell you is that Murphy's second installment of the Netflix Monsters series is also facing some controversy. This time, because the installment about the Menendez brothers apparently has ruffled some feathers with Menendez defenders. And in fact, even Erik Menendez himself has called out the series for being inaccurate. In fact, Erik even went so far as to accuse Murphy of having bad intent due to the nature of the narrative. Now, some of you may know that fairly recently, actually, I just did a 2-part deep dive series on the Menendez brothers case just a few months ago, and I'm going to link that down below for anybody interested. But for those who need an overview, I'll give a brief overview. On August 20th, 1989, a wealthy couple, Mary Louise, known as Kitty, and José Menendez, were watching TV in the den of their Beverly Hills mansion when something truly horrific happened. Later that night, their sons Erik and Lyle Menendez would place a hysterical phone call to 911, claiming that night when they came home from a night out, they found their parents shot dead in the den of the home.
Beverly Hills emergency?
Yes, police.
What's the problem? What's the problem? What's the problem?
Someone killed my parents.
Pardon me?
Someone killed my parents.
What? Who? Are they still there?
Yes.
The people...
No.
Were they shot?
Hey, man, you.
Were they shot?
Yes.
They were shot?
Yes.
102 response, 722 North Elmore, Park.
What happened? Hey, stay there, man.
I have a hysterical person on. We're trying to get screened further. Other units responding. Is the person still there?
What happened? We have units around. What happened? Who shot who?
I don't hear anything. I just came home.
You came home and found who shot?
I'm mom and dad. You know if they're still in the house, the people that did the shooting.
Get away from him. talk to Erik. Who is the person that was shot?
My mom and my dad.
Your mom and dad?
My mom and my dad.
Okay, hold on a second. Okay, we're on our way over there with the ambulance.
Okay, I gotta go.
Okay.
Oh.
Hello, this is police department.
Yes.
Okay, I want you to come outside. Okay, just come out the front door and
never seen my brother.
Initially, police suspected that the mob was involved due to the gruesome nature of the murders. Lyle and Erik, who were 21 and 18 at the time, were taken in for questioning, but they were not at all considered suspects at first. And just to give you an idea of how much they weren't considered suspects, police didn't even check the boys for gun residue. Now, after their parents' deaths, some people did start to get suspicious when it appeared that the Menendez brothers were quickly spending their inheritance on seemingly extravagant purchases like Rolex watches, expensive cars, real estate, and business ventures. But still, some other people saw that massive spending as just being the status quo, since the boys had grown up extremely wealthy, and they were really used to pretty much getting anything they wanted whenever they wanted it. Police kept up with their investigation, but they really had no evidence to support their case, when suddenly there was a major breakthrough in the case. A woman named Judalyn Smith, the mistress of Erik's psychologist, Jerome Oziel, called police to reveal that Erik had confessed during therapy sessions that him and his brother had committed the murders. And she claimed there were even audio tapes of the confessions. And just a few days later, on March 8th, police obtained a search warrant for Dr. Oziel's tapes. And in listening to all 17 audio tapes, police were finally able to piece together what happened to José and Kitty. Now, at the time, the police weren't so sure they can even use these audio tapes as evidence because of the patient-therapist confidentiality barrier, but they took them regardless and figured that the court would rule on that. Then, in March of 1990, Lyle and Erik were arrested and charged with the first-degree murder of their parents. Now, the issue of the therapist audio tapes being admissible in court went all the way up to the California Supreme Court, and they argued for over 2 years back and forth, since there is a law protecting patient-therapist privilege, even in situations where a killer confesses a murder to their therapist. But the issue was, Dr. Oziel claimed that the boys had threatened the life of someone still alive, Dr. Oziel himself. He stated that he felt threatened if he were to tell anyone the truth about the murders. And in June of 1992, the California Supreme Court ruled that only one tape was not barred by the patient-therapist privilege because Dr. Oziel believed the brothers had threatened him during that specific session. After that decision was made about the tape, they were ready for trial. Obviously, since the boys had confessed to the murders, their strategy was to aim for a manslaughter verdict. Back in the early 1990s, Court TV had just started, and they took a major interest in the Menendez case. In fact, Court TV then asked the judge if the trial could be televised. The judge, named Judge Weisberg, who was the same judge for the Rodney King trial, approved cameras in the courtroom, and because of that, the trial began on July 20th, 1993, with the attention of the entire nation. Now, this case is unique for many reasons. One being that the judge ruled that the case would be heard by 2 juries at the same time. He apparently chose 2 separate juries to ensure that evidence against one brother would not improperly sway the verdict on the other. Another reason why the case is so unique is because the boys rattled the nation when they explained the motive for the killings. While the prosecution's main argument was that the boys killed for money, the defense claimed that the brothers had committed the crime in self-defense, since they were in constant fear of their father, because they feared he would kill them if they told anyone about the years of SA they both suffered when they were children. The defense also argued that killing their father for just $560,000 when he was worth far more than that if they had just waited a little bit longer for a separate $2 million life insurance policy to kick in seemed rather short-sighted if the motive was just for money. During the trial, multiple witnesses came forward to reinforce the defense's narrative to prove that the boys were, in fact, horribly abused and feared both of their parents. The boys also took the stand and gave their own testimony of the abuse.
Just started with, after sports practices, he would massage me, and we would have these talks, and he would show me, and he would fondle me, and he would ask me to do the same with him, and I would touch him, and we would undress. He used objects.
What kind of objects?
A toothbrush and some sort of shaving utensil brush.
And what would he do with the toothbrush?
Well, in the bedroom, we'd have what we called object sessions, and just slide my pants down or take my pants off. Sometimes it would be for a short period of time, sometimes longer. Just lay me on the bed and he'd have a tube of Vaseline, and he just played with me.
And was there some point in time when he decided to use something besides the toothbrush?
Yes.
And did he try to anally penetrate you with something else?
He did.
And what was it?
I'm sorry. I just told him that I didn't want to do this, and that it hurt me. And he said that he didn't mean to hurt me. And he loved me.
What did your mom say?
She told me to stop it, and that I was exaggerating.
Did you ever tell anybody else when you were a child? You heard Diane Vandermolen testify. Do you
Yes.
remember telling her?
No.
Did you complain to your cousin Alan?
No, not about that.
Just about punishment. As a child, did you ever tell anybody else what had happened with your dad?
Yes. As a child, no.
Why not?
I was afraid, and my dad didn't want me to.
What did he tell you about telling people?
He just said that it was,
Did
and I
you-
told him I never would.
It stopped for you with your dad when you were 8. When you were about 13, did you think that it might be happening to someone else?
Yes.
And who did you think it was happening to?
Eric.
And did you do something about it?
Yes.
What did you do?
I talked to my dad.
What did you say to your dad?
I told him that I knew what was going on with him and Eric, and I heard noises, and that I wanted him to leave Eric alone.
Now, at some point, did your father stop being nice?
Yes.
approximately how old were you?
I was 11 years old. It was just after I finished swimming. I just didn't know. It was real confusing. He sat down with me, and he came over to me, and he said, "What sport do you want to play? You have to choose a sport." Because I blame myself. I thought maybe he wanted me to do swimming, but at the time I thought he wanted me to choose tennis because Lyle had gone into it.
Now, what was it, Mr. Menendez, that happened that made you think that your father was upset with you for having given up swimming?
He wasn't nice anymore during the sex.
You have to put the mic in.
He wasn't nice anymore during the sex.
Now, do you recall the first time that he wasn't nice during the sex?
Yes. Yes.
And you were 11?
I was 11.
Several cousins came forward as witnesses. An uncle, a female cousin named Vandermolen, had lived with the family during summers when she was young, and she testified that when he was just 8 years old, Lyle confided to her about the essay from his father.
Was there an incident in 1976 in which Lyle Menendez asked you to help him?
Yes, there was.
Where did this take place?
In my bedroom downstairs in the basement.
What
in
time
Muncie.
I'm sorry.
In Muncie.
In Muncie. What time of day was it?
It was nighttime.
And what happened?
We had all been down, Lyle and Erik and I had been downstairs, and the boys had been called up to get ready for bed. I stayed and went into my bedroom, and a while later, Lyle came down, and he was asking if he could, I thought he was there to say goodnight, and he started asking me if he could sleep down there because Kathy had already gone and there was 2 single beds.
Okay, and what did you tell him?
Initially, it pretty much just brushed him off because I wasn't taking him seriously.
And what happened next?
He proceeded to indicate to me by touching himself down and saying that his dad and him had been touching each other down there.
And what did he ask you to do?
He wanted to sleep down there.
And what did you do?
I went and got Kitty and brought her downstairs and told her what was going on.
How did Lyle seem this time? Was this a joke? Or did he...
No, he was serious.
And what happened when Kitty came down?
She didn't believe me.
Did you tell her?
Yes, I told her what I believed to be going on, what Lyle was indicating to me. And she immediately, I don't remember that she said anything to me, just that I knew that she did not believe me. And she took Lyle and brought him back upstairs.
When you say she took him, did she physically grab him?
She took him by the arm and brought him back upstairs with her.
And did you ever discuss the incident with Lyle anymore?
No, it wasn't ever discussed after that.
Now, in 1993, as the nation is watching this, this type of family abuse was never heard before by most people. So it was extremely rare to hear about anything like that publicly. So most people were actually believing that the boys were absolutely lying through their teeth and they were acting. In fact, the boys became a national mockery. Saturday Night Live was doing skits. Many late night comedians were, weaving that into their act. But despite being mocked, Erik and Lyle continued forward with their testimony and their truth. Erik went into full detail that the real motive came about a week before the killings. He had just graduated high school earlier that year and gotten to UCLA and was very excited to move out of the house and onto campus because he'd be getting away from his father's abuse. However, Erik claimed that his father told him he would be required to come home back several nights a week so he could, quote, supervise his homework, which Erik claimed he knew what that meant. More essay from his father. Erik testified that this revelation was what really sent him into a depressive sort of tailspin of hopelessness. And it was around this time Erik said that he finally told his brother Lyle that their father José had been essaying him since he was a child. And this is when the brothers said they just kind of realized in that moment it had happened to both of them. So Lyle, being the older brother who already had more freedom, promised Erik that he would confront their father, threatening that he stop the essay immediately. 2 days after that, Erik said Lyle did stand up for him. He confronted their father and threatened to reveal the family secret unless José stopped the essay. And later that night, Erik testified that his father burst into his room and screamed at him for telling Lyle. Even more upsetting, it was after this incident that Erik claimed his mother, Kitty, actually admitted that she had known all along about the abuse. He claimed that he had tried to tell her for years since he was a child, and his mother would always reply that he was either exaggerating it or, she would imply that he was lying. But when he found out that she knew the truth, this, Erik said, hurt him more than anything else because he realized she was enabling the essay instead of doing anything at all to help him. Erik and Lyle said it was that same night that they began to think their parents would kill them to eliminate the threat of the awful family secret getting out.
I thought it was the stupidest thing in the world that you could possibly do is to threaten Dad.
Now, what was the nature of the threat as you understand it from what Lyle told you?
Just that if Dad ever touched me again, that Lyle would tell everyone.
And why did it concern you that he had said that?
Because you don't go and threaten Dad, and especially what Dad had just done to me. I couldn't believe it.
All right, how did you think your father would react to a threat to expose him publicly as a child molester?
He would not react well.
What does that mean?
He would kill you. He would not permit you to do that.
Was your father a person concerned with his public image?
Yes.
The boys also knew that the mother, Kitty, had recently purchased a gun, which she kept in her closet. So they also knew their parents were technically armed. He said he and Lyle stayed up awake all night and discussed whether to go to the police, to talk to relatives, or to get weapons. And the answer for them always seemed to be that their father was always the one in control and he would always have the money and the power. And the boys agreed that they had to either kill or be killed. Now, in rebuttal to the defense and the SA claims, the prosecution argued that talks of the abuse only really came up after the boys were arrested. They also maintained that if this level of abuse was really going on, of course the boys would have, or should have, reported it. The prosecution rejected the whole idea that those dealing with this level of abuse and control would be afraid to tell anyone. They called the defense's strategy the, quote, abuse excuse, or the idea that a defendant would argue that a prior history of abuse is enough to justify violent retaliation. Further, the prosecution really highlighted and argued that men could not be raped by other men because they lack the necessary equipment to do so.
It's people's position, first of all, that men cannot be raped since they lack the necessary equipment to actually be raped.
Judge Weisberg gave Lyle and Erik's juries 4 choices in deciding the brothers' fate. Number 1 was they could find the brothers guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstances. Number 2, they could find the brothers guilty of second-degree murder. 3, they could find the brothers guilty of voluntary manslaughter. Or 4, they could find the brothers guilty of involuntary manslaughter. After 16 days of deliberation on January 13, 1994, Erik's jury announced that it was deadlocked and unable to reach an agreement on any of the counts. On January 25th, after deliberating for 24 days, which is so long, Lyle's jury announced that it too was deadlocked. The juries for both brothers were split down the middle, actually by gender, over whether the brothers were killers or long-suffering victims of abuse. And interestingly, all of the women thought the boys acted in self-defense, while the men completely disagreed. Judge Weisberg declared mistrials in both cases. The second trial was a first-degree murder case. This time, the trial was not televised, and there would be only one jury. The judge also placed severe restrictions on the testimony regarding the allegations of S.A. Also, the jury was only permitted to deliberate on the charges of murder. So manslaughter was absolutely not permitted to be discussed. However, the defense still argued that the boys killed out of, quote, mind-numbing, adrenaline-pumping fear that their parents would kill them for threatening to expose the family secret. They pointed out that Erik was diagnosed with PTSD due to the years of abuse he'd endured in the home. The defense further pointed out that several witnesses did overhear Kitty telling the boys they were disinherited. Thus, it was risky to kill their parents right then when they were written out of the will, unless, of course, they truly believed they were in danger. In the end, the jury found both Lyle and Erik Menendez guilty of both first-degree murder and murderous conspiracy, and they were sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. And it's interesting to note that after the trial, some jurors actually noted that if they had known there were actual witnesses to the SA or abuse allegations, that they would have never convicted the boys. And many other people have since pointed out, if this case had been about two young girls who were SA'd by their father and there was that many witnesses, likely they would have gotten charged with manslaughter, not first-degree murder. All of that said, in 2018, new evidence in the case appeared to surface. A recently discovered letter that Erik had apparently written his cousin Andy in 1998, which would have been when Erik was 18 years old. And it was a year prior to the killings.
The letter was discovered allegedly or apparently several years ago by a family member and was never presented in court.
Now in it, Erik says in part, "It's still happening, Andy, but it's worse for me now. I never know when it's going to happen and it's driving me crazy. Every night I stay up thinking he might come in. I need to put it out of my mind."
The letter was only discovered in 2018 by José Menendez's younger sister, so, the murdered father's sister, and was not offered as evidence in either trial. In court documents, the brothers' attorneys argue that the new evidence indicates that, quote, José Menendez was a violent and brutal man who would SA his children and was still molesting Erik right before the murders. Then, an even bigger bombshell. In May of 2023, just last year, even more shocking evidence was brought to light by someone never involved in the case before. A former RCA boy band member from the band Menudo named Roy Rosello claims that José Menendez slipped him substances and raped him in the Menendez's New Jersey home when he was only 14 years old.
Included in the petition, a signed affidavit by Roy Rosello, a former member of the boy band Menudo. He claims that he too was raped by José Menendez.
Now, back then, José was an RCA executive and he did work with signing boy band members. Now, this explosive new information added a whole new angle to the case, and technically, it was new evidence for the brothers. So the Menendez brothers' attorney, Cliff Gardner, filed a habeas petition in May of 2023, citing Erik's letters to his cousin and Rosello's affidavit as new evidence that proves his client's convictions should be vacated. As of the time I'm filming this, September of 2024, the judge in the Menendez brothers case is awaiting the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office to respond to that petition. And the informal response is due on September 26th of 2024, as per the DA's office. Now, that brings us up to today. As the Menendez brothers await that response, the Netflix show Monsters, the Lyle and Erik Menendez story, debuted a few days ago, September 19th, and at this time, the creator Ryan Murphy is facing criticism again. The criticism is coming from people who support the brothers' claim of abuse and see the men as victims of SA. An online statement from Erik was posted via his wife Tammy Menendez's X account, and it reads the following. I believe we had moved beyond the lies and ruinous character portrayals of Lyle, creating a caricature of Lyle rooted in horrible and blatant lies rampant in the show. I can only believe they were done so on purpose. It is with a heavy heart that I say, I believe Ryan Murphy cannot be this naive and inaccurate about the facts of our lives, so as to do so without bad intent. It is sad for me to know that Netflix's dishonest portrayal of the tragedies surrounding our crime have taken the painful truths several steps backward, back through time to an era when the prosecution built a narrative on the belief system that males were not sexually abused and that males experienced rape trauma differently than women. Those awful lies have been disputed and exposed by countless brave victims over the last 2 decades who have broken through their personal shame and bravely spoken out. So now Murphy shapes this horrible narrative through vile and appalling character portrayals of Lyle and me and disheartening slander. Is the truth not enough? Let the truth stand as the truth. How demoralizing to know that one man with power can undermine decades of progress in shedding light on childhood trauma. Violence is never an answer, never a solution, and is always tragic. As such, I hope it is never forgotten that violence against a child creates 100 horrendous and silent crime scenes darkly shadowed behind glitter and glamour, and rarely exposed until tragedy penetrates everyone involved. To all those who have reached out and supported me, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Wow, that's actually a very emotionally charged, I think very powerful statement by Erik Menendez. And likewise, defenders of the brothers share the same sentiment that instead of being helpful, the series is actually damaging to their case currently in appeal. And even some critics have had not so nice things to say about the series. The Variety chief TV critic wrote that, quote, "The show attempts to unpack the circumstances that led to the crime while highlighting Erik and Lyle's trauma, but in the end, the narrative feels futile and bizarre." So I'm going to tell you all what I think about this. So some of you know that my major in college was journalism, my minor was film theory, and I can recall for one essay we had to come up with a thesis about whether films were dangerous when it comes to historical accuracy. And I can recall going into how, historical films can be dangerous if they get it wrong, mostly because they can lead people to believe, obviously, inaccurate information, which can be especially damaging when you consider true crime, because some of these true crime stories are literally currently being appealed and could be heading back into court many years after the initial crime. So this false information seen by viewers can actually potentially poison a whole new jury pool because, let's face it, most people don't take it upon themselves after they've seen something to start researching whether something was accurate or not. Now, on the other hand, historical films can be useful even if they're not completely accurate because they can spark interest in a topic otherwise completely unknown. So, for example, if I had never seen Braveheart, I likely would have never known about William Wallace and how he was the main reason Scotland still exists today. Now, that being said, most viewers understand that there is a big difference between a documentary and a standard narrative film. Narrative films are more likely to be dramatized with the director exercising artistic license, while documentaries are typically sticking to hard facts. Now, back in college, my thesis was ultimately that I felt it was more important that historical films be made despite the level of accuracy, and it's the viewer's responsibility to seek out the facts, because in my mind, at least the story is being told, and usually the bulk of the information is most often accurate. And I think today I have pretty much that same opinion. I mean, I look at social media in the same way, meaning nobody should be going and reading any media and just taking that at face value. I think that if you are going to have a strong opinion about something, it would be wise to do further research on the topic before you form a solid opinion. Personally, when I see any kind of statement or any information, it's in my nature to pull up another window and start Googling and diving deeper to see if I can decipher facts from fiction by coming to reasonable conclusions from more reliable sources, which I believe all media consumers have a responsibility to do. And I say that even pointing to this channel, the media that I create, I beg all of you not to listen to me. Go form your own opinion. Go research on your own. Now, that said, I personally also believe that anyone who references this case has a certain responsibility to be careful, because this case has very strong references to the subject matter of SA, and there are major triggers associated with this type of traumatic content. For anyone who has dealt with SA, particularly somebody who was abused as a child, especially by their own parent who's supposed to protect them. Personally, after hearing all of the evidence from the first trial and seeing the new evidence now from Roy Rosello of Menudo saying he was abused by José, it's very hard for me to ignore the abuse evidence. So personally, I believe the boys were horrifically abused by their parents. But even regardless of whether or not you believe the abuse was true in this case, there is just testimony from other relatives and now the new evidence to where other victims of SA find this case to be an important example of what can happen when children are not protected from predators. And because of that, I believe anyone referencing this case should practice extreme care. Because to me, the whole basis of the defense's argument is that the boys felt stripped of their power via various forms of control, particularly sexual control. So I can see how the whole idea of a filmmaker coming in and fabricating more sexualized narrative of the story is almost like another form of abuse now and manipulation of the story on a whole new level, which is exactly what Erik is more or less saying. Further to Erik's point, these inaccuracies are coming at a particularly dangerous time because they're coming at a point where the fate of the brothers is currently in appeal with the court. So as it stands now, I can see why Erik is upset as he is and released that statement if there really are overly sexualized inaccuracies just for the sake of Murphy being able to practice his own artistic license. Now, as a creator myself, I also strongly stand behind freedom of artistic expression. And I also believe viewers have a certain responsibility somewhat to have a little bit of an understanding of the type of creator they're even viewing the work of. And I can tell you, before I even watched the series, I knew going into it that Ryan Murphy is well known for making history by highlighting gay characters and crossing the line. He is a self-declared, quote, gay kid from Indiana who made gay sidekicks the leads. And if you don't know, Murphy was also behind the hit series Glee and Nip Tuck. And he's also known to be someone whose actions don't always quite seem to line up with his words. I understand that as a director, you must walk a fine line to show both sides of the coin sometimes, to show victim and monster. But in this case, if the Menendez brothers are the real victims, it would appear that for the second time, Netflix and Ryan are once again traumatizing the victims all over again. And while art is protected by the First Amendment and freedom of speech, defamation and slander are legal exceptions to the freedom of speech. So in these arenas, one must tread very carefully if any sort of statement is made that can hurt somebody's reputation. And there's a lot of gray areas there. Personally, as a director, I would not want to face any sort of backlash or re-traumatizing victims. I would have been a little more careful not to over-dramatize the sexual aspect of the story, which the brothers claim was how they had been abused as children. If the series truly is misrepresentative of male trauma and sexual abuse, that would be the ultimate tragedy in this case. I wonder how many other victims will see the series as a backward step in understanding childhood trauma, as Erik put it. Now, it remains to be seen if Murphy will respond to Erik's note, and I'm thinking more than likely he may, Because it is worth noting that in the past, when he was criticized for the Dahmer series, he said, quote, "We weren't really interested in Dahmer the monster. It was about who was complicit in making the monster. There were many, many different things involved in that. It was a complicated human story. It tackled systemic racism and homophobia." I will end this video by saying that I have watched up to episode 5 so far, and personally, it's my opinion that I believe the narrative is clearly portraying the parents as the monsters and the boys as the obvious victims here. The only glimmer of sympathy I've seen in the show towards the parents at all comes from direct statements made by the boys when they're already arrested. And I also have to say, from what I've seen, the bulk of the series is pretty accurate. And ultimately, I personally believe the series will more than likely make more people aware of the horrors that the boys went through and make many, many more people question whether they should really be in prison. So what do you all think? Did you get a chance to see the series yet? Do you think that Murphy saw the brothers as the victims here, pointing to how Kitty and Jose were the real monsters? Do you see the series as a backward step in understanding childhood trauma, as Erik put it? Let me know what you all think in the comments section down below. I'm really curious to see what you have to say. For those new to my channel, my name is Tara Marie, and this has been an episode of True Crime Matters with Tara Marie. If you have gotten any use out of any part of this video, please take a second to subscribe so we don't lose each other. It costs nothing, and it would mean so much to me to have your support along the way. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Be careful out there.